In 2017, Vice Media was valued at $5.7 billion. By the summer of 2023, it sold out of bankruptcy for roughly $350 million. That's not a rough patch. That's a structural collapse. For most of the 2010s, Vice looked like the first digital native media company that had truly cracked the code. It had correspondence embedded with ISIS fighters, documentaries on HBO, distribution deals with Netflix, a global footprint spanning dozens of countries, and backing from media giants like Disney and Fox. If you believe the narrative, Vice wasn't just succeeding, it was replacing the old guard. The promise was simple. Young audiences had abandoned traditional television and newspapers. Vice understood the internet. Vice understood culture. Vice understood how to speak to people who distrusted institutions. That audience loyalty would translate into durable revenue. But buried beneath the cultural momentum was a financial contradiction that never resolved. Vice earned like a digital publisher and spent like a television network. And eventually, the math stopped pretending. Vice began in 1994 as Voice of Montreal, a scrappy publication supported in part by a Canadian government program. It focused on subcultures, drugs, music, conflict, and the kind of reporting mainstream outlets often avoided. The tone was immersive and unapologetic. That voice translated naturally to the internet. By the mid-2000s, Vice pivoted heavily into video. On YouTube, its documentaries exploded. War zones, underground scenes, taboo subjects. The production style felt raw but cinematic. Millions of views followed. The timing could not have been better. YouTube was growing at an extraordinary pace. Millennials were drifting away from cable news. Advertisers were desperate to reach younger audiences who were increasingly unreachable through traditional channels. Then the institutional money arrived. In August 2013, 21st Century Fox invested $70 million, valuing Vice at around $1.4 billion. 2 years later, Disney invested $200 million, eventually bringing its total commitment to roughly $400 million. In June 2017, private equity firm TPG injected $450 million at a $5.7 billion valuation. Vice was now priced like a next-generation CNN. But Vice wasn't CNN. CNN's economics are built on carriage fees. Cable distributors pay networks per subscriber every month, whether viewers tune in or not. The average American cable bill is $147 per month. Even a modest per-subscriber fee across tens of millions of households creates a massive, predictable revenue stream. YouTube does not work like that. On YouTube, revenue depends on advertising impressions. Algorithms change. Advertisers pull back during downturns. A video with 10 million views may generate impressive engagement, but the revenue attached to those views is measured in thousands or tens of thousands of dollars, not millions. Vice's flagship YouTube channel generated hundreds of millions of views annually. That sounds enormous. But even if you assume a generous average of $3 to $5 per thousand views, the total annual revenue from those views alone would struggle to support a newsroom with thousands of employees, foreign bureaus, executive salaries, office leases, and global production budgets. This was the structural mismatch. Cable-level ambition, platform-level monetization. Vice attempted to solve this by stepping directly into cable. In June 2016, Viceland launched through a joint venture with A&E Networks. The strategy was bold. Vice would use its brand to attract young viewers back to cable subscriptions. Cable operators would reward the network with carriage fees and premium advertising rates. Digital audience loyalty would convert into traditional television economics. But young viewers did not return to cable. By 2018, Viceland's average primetime audience reportedly hovered around 100,000 viewers per night. The median age skewed far older than the millennial demographic Vice had promised. Meanwhile, cord-cutting accelerated across the United States. Vice had built a cable network cost structure without achieving cable network scale. Then came a moment that quietly signaled a deeper shift. In August 2019, Disney recorded a $353 million write-down on its Vice investment. That was nearly the entire stake. This was more than accounting. It was a public acknowledgement that the expected future cash flows were unlikely to materialize at the scale previously assumed. Up to that point, Vice's valuation was built on forward projections, global expansion, new content verticals, streaming deals, branded partnerships. The belief was that audience growth would eventually align revenue with cost. The write-down suggested that alignment was not happening. When equity optimism fades, capital becomes more expensive. Debt replaces venture funding. The pressure to generate cash flow intensifies. Nancy Dubuc, who became CEO in February 2018, was brought in to professionalize and stabilize the company. Layoffs followed. Cost reductions followed. In 2019, Vice raised additional debt financing to extend its runway. Debt buys time. It also introduces fixed obligations that do not shrink when advertising markets tighten. At the same time, Digital advertising consolidated further around Google and Facebook. Platforms captured the majority of online ad growth. Publishers competed for what remained. Algorithm changes made traffic less predictable. Branded content, once a lucrative pillar for Vice, became less reliable as advertisers scrutinized budgets. Then the pandemic arrived in 2020. Advertising budgets were cut across industries. Media companies reliant on sponsorships felt immediate strain. Vice conducted layoffs in May and continued restructuring throughout the year. The focus shifted from expansion to survival. The open question became unavoidable. Could Vice reduce its cost base enough to become sustainably profitable without dismantling the infrastructure that defined its brand? High-production journalism is expensive. Sending crews into conflict zones requires security, travel, insurance, and logistics. Producing cinematic documentaries requires editors, producers, cinematographers, and legal teams. Running a cable network requires programming schedules, distribution negotiations, and ongoing overhead. Digital revenues do not automatically scale to support that architecture. In 2021, Vice explored going public through a SPAC merger. Talks ultimately fell apart. Investors were no longer rewarding audience growth alone. Profitability and clear paths to cash flow had become mandatory. In 2022, rising interest rates tightened financial conditions further. Capital markets cooled. Advertisers grew cautious. Media valuations compressed broadly. By early 2023, the structure was visibly strained. In February, Nancy Dubuque stepped down as CEO. In April, Vice canceled its flagship Vice News Tonight program. On May 15, 2023, the company filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. Court filings listed assets and liabilities in overlapping ranges. Thousands of creditors were involved. A lender group submitted a stalking horse bid to acquire the company. In July, the sale closed for approximately $350 million. From $5.7 billion to $350 million. Equity holders were wiped out. Control passed to lenders. Notice what did not disappear overnight. The brand still carried recognition. The archive still existed. The reporting had won awards. The audience had not completely evaporated. What collapsed was the financial architecture that had supported the expansion. Vice attempted to occupy the middle ground between lean digital creators and traditional cable networks. It bore many of the fixed costs of legacy media while relying heavily on digital advertising and platform distribution. It sought cable-level returns from a system that delivered platform-level margins. As long as valuations rose and capital was abundant, that gap could be financed. Once growth slowed and capital tightened, the mismatch surfaced. Vice assumed that scale would solve monetization, that a large enough audience would eventually produce revenue sufficient to sustain global operations. The audience arrived. The monetization never fully did. Vice's rise showed how quickly digital attention can translate into cultural power. Its collapse showed that attention and margin are not the same thing. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe if you want more such breakdowns in your feed.